All right. This is Nancy Alexander, and I'm here at the Rehoboth Beach Museum. It is August 11th, 2022, and I am here with Mr. Harmon doing an oral history. Mr. Harmon, would you please state your complete name and your date of birth, please, and spell your name?
Good afternoon. My name is Wardell Emerson Harmon, WardellEmerson, and I was born March the 30th, 1943, at home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
Can you tell me a little bit about your parents and how they came to be in Rehoboth?
Well, as far as I can remember, my mother and my father's people were always here generations. Now, my mother's people, as far as I can remember, were definitely here many generations. I can go back as far as one of I think my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side of the family, Miller, and she was born in 1790. And as far as I can remember, they all lived in Rehoboth. And my father's people, I think they were here since, I think the early 1800s. They moved from, as far as I can remember, they moved from a place called Murdock Hill, Delaware, which was in the area of Frederica, Milford, and the Dover area. And they migrated from Murdock Hill to Rehoboth Beach, and it was in probably the mid 80s, perhaps. I'm sorry, the mid 1800s, as far as I know. But anyway, it was the early 1800s. I don't know the exact date, and our family has been here since around that time. Yes.
Wonderful. I know that we've been doing a little bit of research, and you've done plenty of research on your family. Your family has owned land around the Rehoboth Beach area for quite some time. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I can. And before I go, say that my father was born in Philadelphia. I should have said that before. And of course, you know, the family, my grandfather moved the family down here. The land, I'm not exactly sure how the land came about the ownership of land came about with my great-grandfather and my grandfather, but they did own land down near I think it was Stokely's, the bean factory in Rehoboth. And as far as I know, the Harmon family, beginning with my great-great-grandfather Purnell Harmon and his wife Eliza, moved from the Murdock Hill area to Rehoboth at that, or around, I think, somewhere in the early 1800s or mid 1800s. And to my knowledge, they own property, perhaps an acre or so, in the area where the bean factory was. And later, their great-grandpa, my great-grandfather Thomas Harmon Thomas Harmon's oldest son, John Robert Walter Harmon, and his wife bought and owned property on Hebron Road, where Uncle Walter, we called him Uncle Walter, and his wife Martha, Aunt Martha, had a farm on about an acre of land. And later, Uncle Walter and his wife Martha and his brother Herman, B.J. Harmon, and his wife Edna Harmon, we called her Nanny, Edna, both brothers and their wives bought approximately 28 acres of land each down on, at the time I think it was called Bay Road. I know it was called Bay Road when I was born, because that's where our family home was, my father and mother. Our home was on Bay Road, formerly. Now it's called Country Club Road, and the Country Club, of course, is at the end of what is now, what was Bay Road. Not far from the Country Club, the two brothers and their wives each bought approximately 28 acres of land off of Bay Road. And that's how, as far as I can remember, the Harmons, those two brothers and their wives came about having the amount of acreage that they had. And my uncle that had the farm, of course he and his wife, they did not live on the 28 acres that they bought, because they had the farm, as I mentioned, which was on Hebron Road.
Do you have paperwork and deeds for these properties?
I don't have a deed, but I have seen the deed for the acreage down on the land that was the land, of course, is still there, on Country Club Road. And if my memory serves me correctly, the brothers and their wives purchased the land around 1929 from a man named John Tracy. I don't know. He was a white man that lived in Rehoboth. I'm not sure, what his status was as far as his work, his job, or what he owned before that. But at the time, not that many people lived back on the road, and there was a lot of woods and trees back there at the time. Some land, of course, a number of acres that were tillable. But as far as I know, they did purchase the land from a man named John Tracy, around 1929.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna tighten up a tiny bit. There we go. And then, did the farm have a name? Did any of the farms have names? If not, that's okay.
Well, I can remember them saying that that large acreage, I can remember them calling that the farm.
Okay.
The farmland.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years after they purchased the land, my uncle, one of the brothers, Herman Harmon, and his wife, Edna, moved their home from over where the Harmon property was by the factory. They had their home moved down on their 28 acres of land off of or on Bay Road / Country Club Road. They called it the farm.
And what did they grow?
Well, my uncle Herman had he had chickens. First of all, he had chickens. He had, I think it was a mule, if I'm correct. And they grew sweet potatoes and white potatoes on much of the acreage. And of course, Uncle Herman had his own small garden, and he also had a large grape harbor on the approximately 1 acre of land that his house was on. He had a large grape harbor, and we often picked grapes when they were in season. But I can recall as a young child, I can recall my brother and some other cousins during harvest time when the potatoes were ready. I can recall us going down, and it was at least 4 or 5 of the younger children and my uncles and my father and another cousin, one of the sons of one of these 2 uncles' brother's son. We would all go down and help to get out the white potatoes and the sweet potatoes. There were acres of potatoes, and of course, each of them had cellars, not basements, but cellars under their homes, and we would have potatoes, sweet potatoes and white potatoes for several months into the winter. And it was just a blessing to be able to grow your own crops. And oftentimes Uncle Herman would grow sweet corn and lima beans and greens, turnip greens and collard greens. So and tomatoes, of course. So we always had fresh vegetables from either of the uncles' farms down where the large acreage was, or where my Uncle Walter had his 1 acre farm on Hebron Road. We always had fresh vegetables, always.
Do you remember the address of the farm on Hebron Road?
You
may not have had an address at the time.
I surely do not. I'm not certain, and I was thinking of it the other day. I sort of remember that, the houses did not have numbers on them, but I slightly remember, and I could be wrong, my brother or sister would probably know, but I think Uncle Walt and Aunt Martha's mailbox was, I think it was box 76A. And I could be wrong, but I think it was box 76A. Anyway, the properties were identified by mailboxes. They did not have numbers on the houses. And they just had, to my knowledge, just the 2 numbers on the mailboxes that sat, stood on the edge of the roads. Yes.
So it was really a family affair getting the crops processed.
Yes, and for anyone that, lots of people that are from Rehoboth, if they knew where the American Legion home was, the Black American Legion home, I think it was post 11, if I'm correct. Uncle Walter and Aunt Martha's home was directly across from what was the American Legion home. It was directly across from that on Hebron Road. Yes.
I've been told that building also may have served as a schoolhouse at one point.
It did. It did serve as a schoolhouse. I had finished elementary school when it did serve as a schoolhouse, because when I began school in 1949, I think, when I was in first grade, because they did not have kindergarten in the black schools at the time. And when I began school in 1949, my teacher, or I should say our teacher at the time, was Miss Priscilla Edith Fountain, and she was a native of Milford, Delaware. She would drive those 20-some miles every day to teach down at what was called Rehoboth School 200C. And of course, the two-room school, a DuPont school, built around 1923, was for the black students. Of course, at the time we were called colored at the time, and it was a two-room school. But she was the only teacher, and I can remember at one point in time, I don't know whether it was when I was in the 6th grade, 5th, or what. I can remember at one point when the enrollment was 55 students, and she was the teacher of all of those grades 1 through 6. And when I passed to the 4th grade that September, her sister-in-law, one of her sister-in-laws, Miss Alfreda Fountain, became the teacher of grades 1 through 3 in the other vacant room, the vacant room in the school where I went to school. Now, I left the 6th grade in, I think it was the 55, 56 school year. And at that time, the 6th grades were still in both of those rooms. Now, at a later time, I know I had some cousins that were 3 years behind me. And I do remember that they were attending they attended, I think, 5th and 6th grade in the American Legion building. So I'm not exactly, I had finished, I'm not exactly sure of the years, but the population, the school population had grown a bit, and I'm not sure what we did not fall under the auspices of the white schools, the Rehoboth school district. We were not considered part of the Rehoboth school district. But at the time, when the school population had grown a bit, they added a third teacher, Mr. Smith. They called him Toot Smith. We called him Toot Smith. I forget his name, and George Smith. And Mr. George Smith was, I think, the teacher at that time of the 5th and 6th grades. Miss Fountain, my former teacher, taught, I think, 1st and 2nd grade. Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Alfreda Fountain, taught 3rd and 4th at the two-room school, and Mr. George Smith taught 5th and 6th grade students in the American Legion building until our new school was built in 1963. But I think we were only in that school maybe 2 years, 1 or 2 years before schools became desegregated, or at the time we said integrated, fully integrated. Yes.
So just for clarification, the DuPont School is the brown shingle building that's now on Route 1.
Yes.
And the cinder block building that was built between, say, 1957 and the one that was built in 1963.
63, yes.
That is now on Church Street and is being used as the YMCA.
Yes.
And the American Legion building was in what people now call West Rehoboth.
Yes.
Is there and that was on Hebron Road?
Yes, it was.
That was on Hebron Road.
The American Legion building was on Hebron Road, right across from Uncle Walter and Aunt Martha's homestead on Hebron Road. Yes, it was. Yes.
I know that many members of the community went on to be very successful. Do you want to talk a little bit about what great teachers these folks were?
Miss Fountain was an excellent teacher. I used to kid other students. My wife is from Lois, and I used to kid her and say, your teachers and other teachers like in Milton and Rabbits Ferry, some of the other at so-called colored schools at the time, I said, your teachers were nowhere near as good as my teacher. Miss Fountain, our teacher, was a very creative teacher, very knowledgeable academically and very creative. During my years from 1 through 6, she decided that she was going to put on a circus. And when she did, I can remember being the hind legs, the two legs in the back of the elephant, of whom the front legs and the person was one of my older cousins who was 5 years older than I was, Fred Miller Jr. And we had all the animals, the tigers and lions and elephants, and we had our hula dancers and clowns and whatnot, and we made all of the costumes, the headdresses. I can remember us taking the time to make the elephant's head, and it was wonderful, wonderful. And I do recall when we had put the circus on several times, as I would say. We carried it to various schools, various colored schools in the nearby communities. The school in Belltown, Nassau, Belltown, Delaware, and I'm not sure whether we went to Lois or not, but it was a big thing at the time. And I do remember being in maybe the 4th or 5th grade when we put it on again. I was the hind legs, for some reason, of the zebra. And one of my cousins, Larry Harmon, who was a year older than I was, a year great ahead of me, he was the front legs and the head of the zebra. But it was magnificent. Miss Fountain was so creative, but she was also, she was no nonsense, but she was a wonderful, we learned lots of academics. And when one class or other classes, when she was teaching one class, other classes had work to do. And of course we had to be quiet while she taught that one class. And I am a retired teacher, and I've often thought back and said, my goodness, it took special teachers for teachers who taught in a one-room school, who had like anywhere from 3, could have been 2, anywhere from 3, and at the time when I left in 6th grade, 6 grades, she taught all 6 grades, and we all learned. And I do remember when I finished the 6th grade, there were 11 students in the 6th grade when I finished. So you can see that there were lots of other students, but before her sister-in-law did come, she had all 6 grades for several years, and she did an excellent job because at the time, your parents backed teachers, and it was about learning because as black students, we were told in elementary school, in junior high and high school that we had to work twice as hard as students in white schools because it was hard enough to be accepted into society anyway. So we had to work twice as hard. And lots of people often thought that, well, the black schools were not as good as the white schools. Well, perhaps many of the buildings were not, and we often got hand-me-down books from white schools. But I learned at an early age, and especially after I had begun teaching, I learned that it's not always a modern book or modern this or that. If the contents of a book are meaningful, you can, whether it's an older book or not, you can always learn something. And for instance, English doesn't change that much. Math doesn't change that much. So even though many of our books were hand-me-down books, we still learned because we had teachers that knew how to teach, and they taught, and they disciplined, and the learning environment was what it should have been. And we learned an awful lot, an awful lot. I consider my education then, and junior high, high school, and even college, I consider my education second to none. And and my mother always told us, and my father, learn as much as you can, and remember one thing: you may not go to the white schools. You cannot go to the white schools. You cannot go in the library downtown. But remember, learn as much as you can learn in your school under the circumstances, and remember that you are no better than anyone else. My mother would tell us you are no better than anyone else. You're just as good as everybody else, and carry yourself right, and people will respect you for that. But she said, don't feel that you are inferior. And I grew up with this. This was instilled within us by parents and other relatives and teachers. And I didn't feel that what I was learning was inferior to someone else's, and I always did well, so on tests and things, and when I went to college, and so we had great teachers. I didn't mean to elaborate so much on it, but we had great teachers, and her sister-in-law was a wonderful teacher, and I'm sure Mr. Smith was, although I was not in the school system. I had moved from the school system at the time. I always heard different relatives, students that say that they enjoyed elementary school, regardless of the teachers that they had. So it was about business. It was about learning. No foolishness. But we did have fun too. When you had recess, and like I said, the circus, we had different days that we had fun. We weren't in the books all day long, but it was a learning environment, socially, academically. It was wonderful.
And where did you go to high school, and what grades was high school? Where was the high school?
I went to high school at William C. Jason Comprehensive High School in Georgetown, Delaware. And part of the building, the older part of the building, well, the entire building is now, and it has been, I think, since maybe the late 60s. The building is, where I went to high school, is now Delaware Technical and Community College. I think it's called the Owens campus or something like that, I think, if I'm not, anyway, in Sussex County, in Georgetown. Part of that building was William C. Jason High School, where I attended school in grades 7 through 12. In grades 7 through 12. And I've always loved school anyway, so it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I loved it.
Were there sports or band or any activities?
Yes, yes. It was entirely different from elementary school because we had a teacher for each class. And, that was like a big deal, coming from a small two-room school when I was in elementary school. Yes, we had band. We had all of the sports. I regret that we didn't have sports like tennis and a few other sports, but definitely tennis at the time. Many of the white schools had tennis and some other sports, but we did not have it. But we had football, we had basketball, we had a marching band, we had a concert band. We had probably what any other high school had. I mean, we had art, we had all of the academics, and at the time also, I don't think there were any vocational schools for students who may have wanted to engage in a vocation like carpentry or auto mechanics or agriculture. So at Jason we had we had a woodshop teacher. I forgot what they call them now. I can't think. But anyway, we had woodshop teachers, auto mechanic teachers, and home economics teachers for the girls, and the New Farmers of America for the boys. At the black schools, the agriculture department was called the New Farmers of America, wherein the white schools, if you took agriculture, it was called the Future Farmers of America. So, lots of people that know the history of desegregation and segregation, they know, but we had all the subjects and, physics, algebra, business courses, shorthand for anyone that wanted to take it. We had we had the academics as well as the vocational, and also we had students that wanted to take food trades could take that. But once the vocational schools were built, the vocations, of course, were expanded. But for the time, and of course the state funded the schools, what we did have, the courses that we did have, I would say I guess we had what we should have had, I guess, for that time, because many of the occupations were centered around those vocations. So I guess it was good for the time, those times,
And
yes.
what year did you graduate?
I graduated from high school in 1961.
And where'd you go after that?
After high school, I joined the Air Force. I had a scholarship to attend Delaware State College at the time, which is now, of course, Delaware State University. I had a scholarship, but I decided to go in the Air Force. So after high school, I went in the Air Force, and I was in the Air Force from August of 1961 until September of 1964. and I enjoyed it. I was stationed at Walker Air Force Base in what was Walker Air Force Base in Roswell, New Mexico, those 3 years. And upon getting out of the Air Force in '64, I entered and attended Delaware State College, where I received my bachelor's degree in 1970. I changed my major, so I had to take some different courses, and also I moved my family. I was married. I moved my family. When I got out of service, my wife and I and one child stayed home for 9 months with my mother and father. And then that summer, after my first year at Delaware State College, I moved my family. I sought and gained employment in Wilmington, Delaware. And I moved my family up to Newcastle County. And that next school year, I was not able to go because I didn't have the money. And, we were just adjusting to a new move. And it really hurt me because I love school, but, I knew I had to finish. So, I went back and got my bachelor's degree in 1970 in English education. And my master's degree, I may be getting a little ahead of myself, my master's degree in curriculum and instruction from Delaware State. It was still college, Delaware State College. It became a university in 1993. And I got my master's in 1990 from Delaware State University. And I began my teaching career in 1970, after I graduated with my bachelor's degree.
Where did you teach?
Wow. My first teaching assignment was in what was the Newcastle Gunning Bedford School District at the time. And that was from 1970, I think, until 1976. I think it was 1976. And I had gotten out of teaching. I don't know, I was a little dissatisfied with the administration I taught at, my first year in the district, I taught at Newcastle Middle School, and the next 4 or 5 years, I taught at same district, Gunning Bedford Middle School, and I was a little disappointed with the administration at Gunning Bedford Middle School, one of the principals specifically, because he was a bit prejudiced, and I knew it, but you deal with adults on an adult level. So I said, oh, well, I was just a little disgusted, and I thought, well, let me get out of teaching for a year and a half or so, and I did, and I worked at Gulf Oil, which was Gulf Oil at the time, in Philadelphia, and I said, this is good, but that yearning to teach came back to me, and so I thought, no, I've got to get back into teaching. So I did. I applied for jobs in Alaska. I don't know why. I did. I applied for jobs in Alaska and 3 school districts, and I got 2 of them offered me a job, and I taught for 2 years in one of the school districts in Alaska. And one of them, the first job was in, teaching job was in an Indian Eskimo village in Allakaket, I think it was, yes, Allakaket, Alaska. It was an Indian Eskimo village about 180 miles slightly northwest of the city of Fairbanks. And it was wonderful. The kids spoke English, and it was 3 teachers, no, it was 4. The head teacher and his wife, and there was another teacher, a male teacher that taught, young teacher that taught middle school, and I was the high school teacher. I taught all of the subjects. I had 12 students in high school, and I taught all of the subjects. It was an amazing experience. I loved it.
We'll get back to that. When did you come back to Rehoboth?
I came back, oh wow. Jeez. I had a teaching career of 32 years. I came back to Rehoboth in June of 1919. My wife and I and family had lived up in Newcastle County for 54 years. So I had taught in the Newcastle, Dunning Bedford School District in Alaska, and one of the school districts, Pleasantville, New Jersey. I taught several places, and Middletown, Appoquinimink School District, and I finished my teaching career in the Baltimore City Public Schools, as well as while in Baltimore also. 3 of those years I taught at Morgan State University. But, you know, having been in Newcastle County for 54 years, it wasn't a hard decision to move back to Rehoboth, but we did move back in June of 2019. 2019. That's when I moved back to Rehoboth.
I'm sure you saw a lot of changes coming back.
Yes, an awful lot.
Let's circle back to your mom and dad. I know they were extraordinarily hardworking folks. Can you tell me more about them?
They were. My father finished the 11th grade at Delaware State College High School. They had, of course, when they were going to school, high school, if you were black and were going to high school in Delaware, you either went to the high school, which housed, I think, grades 9 through 12 at Delaware State College, or you stayed with someone, a relative or someone in Wilmington, and you attended and hopefully graduated from Howard High School. Well, my father finished the 11th grade at Delaware State College High School. He took up cabinetry. He was a cabinet maker and carpenter, I guess you could say. He was excellent. His occupation, he was an excellent carpenter and excellent cabinet maker. He worked hard. He worked for Bessel's Lumber Company most of his years, which I think was located, one of the places was located in Lewis, Delaware. I think his boss was the owner of the Bessels. I think it was Alan Bessels, if my memory serves me correctly. He worked hard, got very little pay. I do remember seeing some of his paychecks in later years, and it wasn't much. He was a hard worker. He always provided for the family. He was a good father, and he worked hard. He worked there, I think, 28 years, I think, before retiring from there. And then he had his own lawn service. He cut and maintained lawns for various people, and he also worked part-time in the summers as a dishwasher at the Dinner Bell Inn, where my mother worked for, I think, 40-some years as their primary baker. She was their baker in the bake shop. And both of my parents worked, as far as I can remember, they always worked. From the time I can remember growing up as a kid, they always worked until their 60s, you know, and I mean, they worked hard, but they stayed together, and they were good parents. They were wonderful parents.
And their names?
My father was named um, Walter Harmon. It was, I think, Walter William Joseph. He didn't know what his real name was until he applied for Social Security. But anyway, everyone knew him by Walter Harmon, Walter J. Harmon. And my mother was Edna Mary Miller Harmon. And both, of course, you know, my father was born in Philly, as I mentioned, but when his father moved to Rehoboth, of course, he was very young when my grandfather moved to Rehoboth. So he did attend schools in the area, Rehoboth, and in the area because my grandmother, his mother, died at an early age, and different people in the community, you know, took a couple of the kids, but he lived in Rehoboth for many years, although he was born in Philly. Yes, Philadelphia.
Was there a story about how your parents met?
They knew each other from young children here in Rehoboth, and I never heard my mother talk about having another boyfriend. I never heard it, and I never heard my father talk about having another girlfriend. So they knew each other as children here in Rehoboth, and I think they began, as the old folks would say, courting or going together. I think they began probably going together when my mother was in high school or near the end of her high school years, because my mother did not graduate. She attended, I think, 3 years at Delaware State College High School, and then she finished her senior year at Howard High School in 1940. So they knew each other when they were young, and I think they began going together when my mother was in high school, and of course Dad quit school after the 11th grade, and that's how they met, and they married, and they got married in 1940. About 1940, yes.
Where did they live? What house did you grow up in?
I grew up in the family home, which was located on Country Club Road. And it was a small home. My father built it. I don't know who else helped him because he was an excellent carpenter. It was a small home, kitchen, living room, and 2 bedrooms that I can remember when we were growing up. And the property, it's an interesting story. The property of which our home was on was given to them by one of the brothers and his wife, who had bought the 28 acres of land. In fact, I think somehow or another, where our home was located, I think my mother and father said that it was that small piece of property was a gift from both brothers and their wives who had bought property back there. But I know one brother had property in the front, and one had property in back of the other. But where my parents' home was, I think both brothers owned a strip of land on the other side of Bay Road. That's where I grew up, in that home down there, and that's where my sister and I were born. My brother was born in BB Hospital. That's where I grew up. We grew up there, and my father remodeled, I guess you could say he remodeled. The only standing part on the home was the front porch, which served as a bedroom when I was growing up. My father remodeled and built a larger home, and I think I may have been 16, maybe 16, 15 or 16, when Dad built the new home, so to speak. And that home was on the same location of the first home that we lived in, yes.
And you have two siblings.
Yes, I do. I have an older brother, Wayman Elliott Harmon, who is, Mom always said 15 months. If you said a year, she said no. 15 months older than my twin sister, Wayne Harmon Paskins. And there were only the three of us. My brother Wayman was the oldest, and my twin sister Wayne Harmon Paskins and I were the other two. So there were just the three of us.
So let's go to just some other topics in general. Do you remember prominent people in the community, businesses that you patronized?
Yes, where we lived it was about a mile and 2/10 from Rehoboth Avenue. You could say Rehoboth Avenue extended. So we either rode our bicycles out when we were old enough, like 9, I think, something like that. We either rode our bicycles out or walked out. Of course, there were no stores down on that road because I think there were only maybe about 8 families. I think. And my uncle Herman and Aunt Edna and my parents, when I was really very young, they were the only two black families that lived down there. And there were about 5 or 6 other families on the road who were, white people that lived down there. My Uncle Walter and his wife, Aunt Martha, babysat us from the time, because Mom and Dad always worked, as I mentioned. They babysat us from the time my brother was born, and then when we came along, they babysat us. They did not have any children, although they raised my father's youngest sister because her mother had passed at an early age. They raised her. Uncle Walt and Aunt Martha raised her from the age of about 2 years old, but they did not have any children. And they babysat other children too, but they babysat us, and it was like our second home because he had a little farm out there. And they were like the grandparents since our grandmother died early. They were like the grandparents that we really didn't have, but they were our aunt and uncle, but they were really, really true grandparents to us, that's the way they treated us. We would go to, the only 2 stores that I can remember were a store called Haddock's, which wasn't far from where my Uncle Walter and Aunt Martha lived. And it was one, the owners of that store, I think, I knew them by Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. Oh, and yes, one of my cousins, cousin James Edward Wapers, also had a small store where he sold candy, pretzels, and ice cream, and bread, and little things like that. It was located next to the school ground where our school was and where, of course, the Y is now. He lived there, and he had a small a small store. So if we wanted something from the store, within walking distance, we either went to Haddock's store or the Morgans, whose store was a little further down just before you cross I call it the old bridge coming into Rehoboth. And my cousin's store, cousin James Edward Wafer's store. So those were the stores where you could walk at the time. But other than that, you would have to go downtown if you wanted something. And then there was a store, the Collins Boys store, which was like a couple miles north of Rehoboth. And at the time I was growing up, coming into Rehoboth, it was at the time I was growing up, when I was very young, it was only a 2-lane road in and out of Rehoboth. They did not have the door. It was only a 2-lane road. And Colin Boy's store, which is up by, I think it's, what's located up there now? The coffee store,
Oh, the Point?
no, what's the store? Oh gosh, the company,
Big company, Starbucks?
Starbucks. I'm sorry.
So it was on Route, it was a couple of miles north of Rehoboth.
Yes.
And on the left-hand side as you're going north,
Yes.
somewhere in there.
The Collins Boy store was a few feet. You could say, I'd just say no more than 50 or 60 feet from where the Starbucks store is now. The Collins Boy stores, they have a miniature golf course or something around. That used to be that store. The Collins, that family, they had what you might call a little deli now. You know, you could get meats and ice cream. You could get some similar things that you could get at Haddock's and Morgan, but those were the 3 stores. And I think it depended upon where you might go, where you would go because of, well, probably, I guess the way they treated you. Now, they treated us fine. But speaking of stores, briefly, Haddock store was closer to my uncle, so we went there more. But I do remember hearing my father say, hearing my father say that the owner, I don't know what, I think his name was Howard Haddock, I think. Because at the time, you know, we always called people, we were taught to call people Mr. and Miss or Mrs. And Dad said, well, and Mom and Dad always told us, you know, don't loiter in stores and don't put your hands on things unless you're going to buy them. And I do remember Dad saying that Mr. Haddock was a Klansman. I remember my father saying that. Now, I don't recall any things happening or anything like that in the store, but his wife, he worked in the store, his wife, Mrs. Haddock, and Mrs. Haddock had an older, well, I don't know whether he was older than she was, but she had a brother who was an older man that also worked in the store. He was as nice as he could be. We called him Archie. But I do remember when you made a purchase, a lot of times they would want you to put the money on the counter, not, you know, yes, on the counter instead of, you know, like touching their hand. I do remember that. And I never remembered Mr. or Mrs. Haddock saying thank you when you made. She would always say, mm-hmm. That was her thank you when you purchased. But her brother Archie would say thanks. To me, I remember him saying thanks. But the husband and wife, they were nice. They were not. I never experienced anything bad from them, but as a child thinking back, they never said thank you. She would always say, and he would say maybe little to nothing, but they were okay, they were nice, but she would always say, instead of saying thank you, because we would say thanks, and she would just say, mm-hmm, and you just, you know, you laugh. But that was my experience, you know, going,
right.
And then of course, you know, if you wanted clothes or shoes or something, you would come downtown and go to what was Wall Smith's store at the time, and I forgot the name of the shoe store, Flats, I think it was Flats shoe store downtown. So, you know, it was okay. I never had any problems with any. I never experienced anyone, white people or anyone calling me the N-word, nigger. I never experienced that. And I mean, I had a good childhood growing up. I don't know what others experienced, but I never did. And I enjoyed it I enjoyed it as a child growing up down here.
Now, you
Yes.
mentioned a Mr. and Mrs. Morgan?
Yes,
Did
yes.
they own a separate store from Hammond?
Yes, they did.
And what
They're-
was that called?
Well, all I knew it was, I just knew it was the Morgan store. I don't know. And later on, it was called, I think they said it was called the B&E Market. Excuse me.
Now, were they white or were they?
They were white.
They were white,
All
okay.
of the store owners were white, except cousin James Edward, who had his own little store. They
And
were white.
what, did his store have a name?
I don't recall it having
Okay,
one.
no worries,
I don't recall it having one.
just his store.
No, I don't recall.
Okay.
I just remember getting candy and pretzels and things before and after. Before we would get on the bus, that's where we caught the bus, because we had to ride the bus from Rehoboth to Jason when I was in grade 7 through 12, and that's where we boarded the bus in front of cousin James. We call him Jim Ed, but cousin James Edwards Wade was his store. But I don't recall it having a name. It may have had one, but I don't recall it having one.
Now, how did you get your pocket change for pretzels and candy?
Well, some allowances. We didn't get a lot of allowances, but we had relatives, older relatives, and some people that weren't relatives. I remember a lady named Miss Natalie Hall. She lived across the small lane from my Uncle Walt's pasture, where he had the pasture for his horses. And oftentimes she would ask us to go to the store for her, just like others. I had one of my mother's second cousins, an older lady. She lived in the vicinity too. I think at one time she may have been a roomer at Miss Natalie's home. And several people would ask us to go to the store, my uncle and my aunt and some other relatives, and they would give us money, like a quarter, dimes and a nickel. You could buy several pieces of candy for that. But they would give us money, and we would get a small allowance. But I began working downtown in the summers. I began working at 11 years old at the Barbaloo restaurant, which was close to the Betty's Bake Shop on Rehoboth Avenue. And so I was only making, I think it was $18 a week, working probably 30 some hours a week, only $18 a week. But my mother and father, when we started working, my mother and father took us to the bank, which was Sussex Trust, which is, I think now is M&T, which wasn't far from where we worked. They took us to the bank to open savings accounts. Mom and Dad never took any of our money. We put most of it in the bank, and we kept some out for spending change. So between going to store for people before I started working, little pocket change, and then when we started working, we would go to store for people up until we were teenagers, and so that's how we got spending change.
No.
But I always worked in the summers until I got out of high school.
Now,
Always.
how do you spell it? The Barbaloo?
It was Barbara, B-A-R-B-A-R-A, Barbara. I think the restaurant was named after the lady's daughter, Barbaloo.
L-O-U maybe?
L-O-U.
This is,
I
so
think
two
it was
words, Barbaloo
Barbara,
restaurant.
I think it was L-O-U apostrophe S, I think. I think that's the way it was spelled. I worked there for I think I worked there for 3 summers. I started work at 11 there. That was my first summer job. And I think I worked there 3 years washing dishes. And yes, I did. And then when I was 14, I worked as a dishwasher and pot washer at the Dinner Bell Inn, which wasn't far on Christian Street at 14, yes. But we always worked, my sister and brother, we always worked in the summertime.
So you worked with your mom at least at the Dinner Bell?
Yes, she
Same
was
time as
working
your
there,
mom?
yes, at the time, yes. At some point in time, I'm not sure whether my brother worked there or not, but some point in time, my sister worked there, and my father, as I mentioned, worked there in the summers, part-time, and of course, my mother worked there 40-some years, and other relatives also worked there at the Dinner Bell. And
What did your father do at the Dinner Bell?
he washed dishes.
Oh,
He was one of the best dishwashers that they had there. He was fast, and I didn't like to wash dishes. If I wasn't washing pots in the pot and pan corner, I didn't like to wash dishes with him because he was too fast. And and being a father, if you didn't keep up with when he was putting the dishes, because he was always the head dishwasher, scraping the dishes off and putting them in the racks and sending them through. If you didn't keep up with him, I know with me because I was his son, he would often yell at me. I did what I could as quickly as I could, and I didn't worry about it. But I didn't like the help because that Dinner Bell had probably some of the best food. The Dinner Bell and the Avenue restaurant, I worked there too. Any restaurant that I know in Rehoboth, I didn't eat at all of them, but the Dinner Bell had some real good food. And I just did not like washing, if I was needed when they got real busy, I didn't like washing dishes when Dad was working on the weekend. But it was okay. If I had to, it was okay. I just tried to pick up the pace.
I think our parents could be our worst
Yes, because
critics.
they expect
They
perfection.
expect perfection.
Excuse me.
And there's another bottle of water right there.
Uh,
Now there's also, I think your mother made incredible biscuits. Your mother made, I think, really famous rolls. Yeah, sorry,
Oh.
yeast rolls.
Yes, she was famous for her rolls. Oh my God, everybody that ate at the Dinner Bell, worked at the Dinner Bell, knew about Edna Harmon's rolls because they had eaten them. Yes, and Mom was an excellent cook at home, as well as a baker at home and on the job.
Well, your sister said she might have that recipe. I'm still waiting.
She has it somewhere. Mom had it. I have not, I can cook and bake, but I have not attempted, I'm too lazy, I have not attempted to bake rolls. But, oh God, they were so good. People that ate it raved about Mom's rolls. Yes, indeed.
I just have,
Excuse me.
it's okay. I just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Was church a big part of your family's life?
Yes, it was. We've gone to, we had to attend, the three of us, we had to attend church almost every Sunday. When I can remember, as far as when I was old enough to remember. And we went before I could remember. Because Uncle Herman, one of the owners of the land down on Country Club Road, Uncle Herman, for many years, was the church school superintendent. So, we always when we were too small to walk, Dad or Mom would take us, or Dad, or we would get a ride with Uncle Herman if we had to, But we always attended church, and Mom used to always tell us, because when you're doing restaurant work, you have to work on weekends, and Mom worked many Sundays, but Mom would say, and during the off season, she would go to church because they would draw unemployment, But Mom would always say during the summers, when we was younger, if we weren't working, when we started working, if we weren't working on Sunday, Mom would always say, "You're going to church." And she would tell Dad if he wasn't working also at the Dinner Bell at that time on Sunday, she would tell him make sure they go, and he would go to church because he sang in the church choir most of the time. And we had to go. And I did not regret it at all Because, sometimes as children, you really don't want to be stuck in church. Weren't there all day, but children, you just find something else to do other than being in church. And as a young person, you don't fully understand what they're talking about when you're really young. You don't fully understand. I didn't. You don't fully understand what they're talking about, but you sit and try to listen the best that you can. But but I do remember Mom saying, and we were like 16, 17, if you're not working on Sunday, you're going to church. And we had to. So, and one of my older cousins, who is living now, Juanita Boyer, I think she goes by maybe Juanita Walker now. She's a retired teacher. And I remember when she taught what would we call the older students, when I was like between 13 and 16, 17, she taught the older class Sunday school class. She was excellent. I learned so much at the time, about different things in the Bible, because she broke it down. And she was as I said, she was a teacher. She's like 10 years older than I am. She was a teacher, but she made it interesting. And when somebody makes it interesting, and I always love learning anyway. You learn. But although we had to go, it was a pleasurable experience. And church, and many for different days, like homecoming, which was a certain time each year, annual homecoming, and for Men's Day and Women's Day, and the Sunday school. We had different days when, you would have programs and things. And one of my most memorable things about church was many times after certain annual days or different programs that they would have, where they would have guest preachers to come and preach. And sometimes they just fix dinners, cook dinners to raise money. One of my most memorable things was always buying, sometimes they would give them, but most of the time you had to buy it. When I was like a young, maybe preteen, teenager, I think dinners sold in the basement for like maybe $1. You would have chicken and dumplings, and we had some good cooks in the community. Chicken and dumplings and the works. And having wonderful dinners was a high point in my life as far as church was concerned. But just being a youth in church, Miss Floney Duffy was our choir director, and she was the pianist for many years for the church. And she would put on programs, I would say, for Youth Day and different days, and we would have parts. You had to recite something, or you just in maybe a little skit you were in or something. But they were such memorable times, and and although sometimes I would say in my mind, I'd rather be home doing something else. You didn't say it to your parents, but I'd rather be home doing something else. But after becoming, I can't speak for everybody, but after becoming grown, you realize that those were important times if you were believers, because some people are not. They were important times. We were raised in the church, so to speak. And you just learn, not only in church, but in school. it was a community where you respected people in school, in church, and when you would go other places. So I attribute my church attendance to being a major part of my upbringing as a youth. I loved it. I enjoyed it.
Do you know how to tell was it Miss Flona Duffy?
Flonnie.
And how did she spell her name?
Flonnie.
And then Duffy, Duffy.
Yes. She's the Duffy family that's in the Rehoboth area, in Rehoboth.
And was she a Miss?
She was Miss, yes.
Miss, okay.
I don't
Just wanna
recall
make
her
sure.
ever being married, yes, Miss Flonnie.
I've just got two other questions.
Yes.
I know you probably did have a lot of fun when you weren't at school or in church. What kinds of things did you do for fun from the earliest years to the time you went off to school?
Well,
I know you mentioned the circuses.
we, outside of school, because my Uncle Walt had the farm there, some of I don't think my brother ever did. Some of the young men, the guys that were in the community, Uncle Walt's place was a meeting place for a number of children, because I don't recall anybody else having a small farm like that in the area. And he had the 2 horses and chickens, and I always loved, that's where I learned a lot that I learned about agriculture. I always loved being around animals. When we were growing up, when we weren't in school, when I wasn't in school or working, we would ride the horses. Uncle Walt didn't want us to ride them, but he often worked at the Indian River Inlet, I think at the time. He was older. On certain weekends, he would work at the Indian River Inlet, for a number of years. But because I used to help to harness the horses, and I was always around them, I had to help to feed them and that sort of thing. I could ride them. I mean, I learned. I don't even know whether Uncle Walt knew I could ride, and he may have. I don't know. But we would ride the horses. Some of my other cousins, we did that, and you played just games like other kids play, because that was a meeting place for a number of kids. Hide and seek, and another cousin that's living, he was a Harmon too. He is a Harmon living in Louisiana. We would play horse and like we would be the horses. We would make the print of a horseshoe with an evaporated milk can. You hit the bottom of it and make the print in the back, and it would make a horse print. And we would have it under our 2 hands, and we would get down and walk. We would pull wagons. We would just act crazy like that. We played, we didn't have a basketball court or anything, but we played dodgeball and some of that kind of stuff, and oh my gosh, and and I cannot leave out the fact that I was also, among others, a Boy Scout, and we met at our troop always met in the American Legion building, and Mr. Spencer Foreman, Foreman, and Mr. James Burton, who was a relative, they were our scout leaders. Mr. Spencer was the head scout leader, and Mr. James Burton was the assistant scoutmaster when I was growing up. So we went to Camp Rodney in many years, several years, 5 or 6 years when I was a scout. We went to Camp Rodney, which I think it still is located in northeast Maryland, outside of Elkton, Maryland. That was a highlight of my summers, really. We would go to scout camp for anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. It depended on the schedule. Oh my God, it was wonderful. So we played the various games when we were not working, helping the older relatives when we weren't working, or when we weren't working our jobs, summer jobs downtown in Rehoboth. We did that, went to scout camp, and on our own time, we would also go swimming. I don't think my brother did. I don't know. I don't think he could swim. I think he probably would say he could, but I don't know. We would also go swimming. I would down at the ocean, and in the canal. I did once in the canal, but Mom and Dad always told us don't swim in the ocean if there's not a lifeguard. Don't other people can be on the beach, but don't if they don't have a lifeguard. And Uncle Oswald, it was a lifeguard, and then after later when he retired from being a lifeguard, I think the man that we still live in Hicks. I think his name is Buddy Hicks. He was the other black lifeguard down in Rehoboth. But she always said, don't go in unless, and she said, she and Dad would say, never swim in the canal. But I did. While I was 14, maybe 15, one of my cousins that lived on the other side of the canal by the factory, we were walking, Jimmy Boyer, Larry Harmon, I think Bobby Martin. We were like 4 or 5 of us. We were walking up from the beach. I don't know whether I had worked that day or what, but we were walking up from the beach because some of them worked too. And my cousin Larry, he was mischievous. Larry said, let's when we got up to let's swim across the canal. So they have a little dock somewhere down there now. Let's swim across the canal. So I thought, oh no. And all the time in my mind, I'm thinking, I want to do it, but Mom and Dad said, don't do it. Went down, we had shorts on anyway, went down, and Larry jumped in first, several others jumped in, and I jumped in and swam across the canal, and I could swim, and the entire time I was swimming across, I was nervous, and I kept thinking, Mom and Dad used to say, don't go in the canal. Swam across, my cousin Larry said, let's swim back across. 2 or 3 of them swam back across. I said, I'll see you guys later. Climbed the bank and went over to Uncle Walt's and Aunt Martha's was like the second home. But I did not. But it was a scary time, but I mean, I could swim, so I was blessed not to have drowned, you know. But we would do that, we would swim, and we even, when I was I would say an older, not real older teenager, we would also, we had fun going down to, we would we could ride in the bumper cars. They didn't say we couldn't. We got the ticket, we rode in bumper cars. Oh, and as far as having fun as a child, I think it was every Tuesday or Wednesday. I cannot remember. I should have asked Wayne. Every Tuesday or Wednesday, right there at the center of the boardwalk, the town of Rehoboth had record hops. That whatever that day was, each week during the summer, and we danced right in that middle part, right there, as you can see, on the boardwalk. Of course, you know, they had people couldn't go by if they went, but it was later. We would have record hops later in the afternoon, beginning evening, and that went on. I think I was like maybe 13, 14, 15, 16. That went on, I think, until I was about 15, and all of a sudden they stopped having them. Why? Because, you know, I'm not being prejudicial, but a lot of blacks with rhythm and blues and rock and roll, that was our thing, because, we could dance. A lot of now kids from other places, white kids from other places and some blacks, they would join us. It was nothing for people that were from Philly or New York, other places. They didn't care, they would join us. We would dance with each other. But I think it was such an entertaining thing, and we were having so much fun, and it was so integrated that the city, I don't know why I was a kid, I didn't even have, the city stopped having them. When, it became too integrated. And we had fun. The city sponsored it, but we had fun. So they were highlights. We had fun. But, we did things like that, and and we would go to other people's houses, and then, at different times people would have cookouts. So it wasn't, to me, it wasn't boring. It wasn't boring at all growing up.
Couple of quick questions. When you went to the beach where Oswald Winchester was
Yes.
the lifeguard, he was the first African-American lifeguard hired. What did you call that beach?
The Crow's Nest.
Okay.
Now, I think that was a name given to that part of the beach by blacks. I don't recall, from the time I was a child, that's all I remembered it by, that section. And I guess blacks called it that because black people, I don't know who named it that, but as I was growing up, that's what they called it. And that was the part of the beach where, although it has been rebuilt, remodeled, that was the part of the beach where the Henlopen Hotel sits now. That was the part of the beach that they called it was, of course, as you can see, if you've been down, it was near the northern part of the beach. Mm-hmm. See, of course, it wasn't in the middle, So, it's just like many other places and things. They would always say, black folks lived across the tracks, which we did, mm-hmm. if there were train tracks, and because at the time no one lived down here except. As we had mentioned before, that Uncle Oswald's mother did own a rooming house or something downtown here on Rehoboth Avenue. I don't recall, there could have been, I don't recall any other blacks owning a place downtown, and how she got that or whatnot, I don't know. And she wasn't light enough to pass for white. They knew she was black. And she also owned what we would call a tap room, or a beer joint or whatever, over by the factory called. It was, at the time we were young, it was called the Horseshoe Tap Room. So, it was. We were used to it, and I remember asking Mom when I was about maybe 7 or 8. I said, Mom, why can't we go in the Rehoboth Library? I was always interested in books, animals, especially birds, horses, chickens. I remember asking her, and she said, sit down at home. And I sat, and she said, you can't go in the library because colored people are not allowed. And I was maybe 6 or 7, I guess, I don't know. She said, colored people aren't allowed. And I said, why? And she said, because we're not, we can't go some of the places, where white people go. And I know that's one of the times that she said, but although you cannot go in the library, don't consider yourself inferior to anyone. You're just as good as the next person. You're no better. Don't consider yourself better. You're no better, but you're just as good as any other person, regardless whether they're white, black, or whatever. And that carried me a long ways. And as the years went on, you understood. But I will recall this now. There could have been some. I do not recall seeing any signs in Rehoboth that said colored only. And another thing as far as entertainment, you asked me, another thing as far as growing up down here, I think there was the Blue Hen Theater, indoor theater, the Center Theater, and I think there was another one, I can't remember exactly. But we were allowed to go into theaters, but we had to sit in the balcony. I know those two. I think there was another theater, but we had to sit in the balcony. And we did attend, we did go to the theater often. And I don't recall that we were able to go in the skating rink downtown. I don't think we could go in there. But little did, I guess, the people realize that even though we sat in the balcony, those were good seats. Because you could see, you know, they were on the stair level, and you could see over people's heads. But if you sat down the stairs, where many of the seats were on the same level, you know, the screen was, of course, up a little, but they were good seats.
Was Spencer Foreman the projectionist?
Excuse me?
Was Spencer Foreman the projectionist at the movie theater?
No, they were white people.
Oh, I thought
No,
was.
it was,
okay.
they were run, I don't know who owned them. I think we had a drive-in theater at Midway.
Mm-hmm.
And a man, I don't know what I can't remember what his first name was. His last name was Derrickson. So now, Mr. Derrickson may have owned the theater. I don't really know.
I think so.
I don't remember as a child, but I know he owned the drive-in theater, which was behind where the stores are now, the Dunkin' Donuts and place.
Yes.
It was behind that. He owned, I think he owned all of that. He may have owned these, I'm not sure. But no, they were white operated and run.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Actually, two more questions. One, did you go to the 400 Club in what's now called West Rehoboth?
Excuse me. No. To my knowledge, the 400 Club was for adults. I don't recall. I don't even know who started the 400 Club, but I know my Aunt Lorette and some other people were members of the 400 Club. I don't know whether Mom and Dad were or not, but I think it was mainly a social club for adults. I don't know, you know, they had music there from time to time. Now, I don't know whether they sold beer and whiskey spirits, I don't know. But we also had dances and things there for the youth. That's another thing we did. And I don't know whether Wayne showed you a picture of it or not. That's where Wayne and I had our 16th birthday party at the 400 Club. And Aunt Lorette took lots of pictures. And Mom used to always say, she gave Uncle Walt and Aunt Martha, because they babysat us, because Mom and Dad had to work. And Aunt Lorette credit those three people and other relatives. She said, I give those three people a lot of credit because they did a lot with us. And Aunt Lorette, I think, was the one that Dad and Mom helped, but she was the one that sponsored that for us. She loved kids. She didn't have any children. She loved children, and she loved taking pictures. She took lots of pictures. So Wayne and I had our 16th birthday party there. But it was more or less a social club for adults, yes.
And how do you spell her name?
Who's that?
Lorette.
Aunt Lorette. Aunt Lorette's name was spelled, excuse me for blowing up. Aunt Lorette's name was spelled Laurrette.
Was she Lorette Harmon?
She was, her name, Lorette, her middle name Bayless, Baylis, Lorette Bayless Harmon. Lorette Bayless Harmon.
Oh,
And I don't know how long she was married to Uncle Oswald, but she obviously did not carry the Winchester name for long. I don't know exactly how long, but she did not. So they weren't married long, so I don't know. I was too young to know yet. But she did a lot, not only for us, but other nephews and nieces too,
Yeah.
and cousins.
I think if you like kids and you don't have any, you do try to help out
Yes.
anyone else.
Yes. And
Last-
she was a high school graduate also. She graduated she went to Dallas State too, but she graduated also from Howard High School in Wilmington. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Last question.
Mhm.
What advice do you have for people, younger people in the world? What have you learned throughout life, and what advice would you give to someone younger?
My advice to the younger people, doesn't matter what race you are, what ethnic group you are, my advice to the young people is to, first of all, if you have, and I'm not gonna complain, but if you have good parents, because some parents are a little wayward, obey your parents, listen to what they tell you, because most parents will not tell you anything wrong if they know what they're telling you. Obey your parents, get a good education, the best that you can. Kids often say, I don't like school, I don't want to go. I didn't, but I don't want to go to school. It's necessary. Go to school, stay in school, do the very best that you can. You don't have to be an A student if you can't, but do your best. And my advice to you, do your best in whatever you do. And now I'm a believer in God. I don't consider myself a religious person because various religions can get you caught up. I consider myself a spiritual person because I feel that's something you feel within. And although I disagree with some things that people do, I don't like racism. I don't like inequality. However, but I would also let them know. First of all, carry yourself in the manner where you where you demand respect. You don't have to tell people to respect you, but by the way you carry yourself, people will know whether to respect you or not. And carry yourself in such a way that you are to be respected and you respect other people. And some of the young people do not realize that and adults, in order to get respect, you must first give it. And one final thing I would say is to have a heart full of love. Don't hate people, regardless of the color. We know that sometimes people do things to us that they shouldn't do, but if you stay in school and you learn, you can learn how to, I would tell them, you can learn how to handle things in an intelligent way. None of us are perfect and we all slip up sometime, but self-control. Learn self-control. And I know I talk a lot, but I would also tell them, do more listening than talking. You can learn a lot and just be fair with people and treat people the way you want to be treated fairly and get the best education, and you should not have a problem anywhere you go in this world. Just have a heart full of love and understanding and help people. Help people. That's the main thing. Don't be arrogant, haughty, so proud. You're proud of accomplishments that your children make and things like that. But as my mother used to say, just don't put on 2-cent airs and be down, no matter how much education you get, how much money you have, or how many friends you have that are rich or whatever. Just be down to earth and be a good human being. And people will see that, as the Bible says, people will see your good works. And you don't have to tell them, they can see it. And most people will treat you accordingly. And I certainly have enjoyed doing this interview with you, Miss Alexander. And you're doing a terrific job.
I'm
for
trying.
Rehoboth.
I'm trying.
You're appreciated more than you know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.